You kind of hit one of them, which is God candles, $10,000 candles on the daily chart in one day. And the next step, I think, is the Omega candle, which is $100,000 candle on the daily. Hopefully green, but possibly red.
That's a good caveat.
Like we had a red Godzilla candle recently, right? It went down like 13,000. So it can go both ways. But the trend, I believe, is that we're going to see Bitcoin become much more turbulent in bigger swings up and down as we go towards $1 million per coin and beyond that, because this is sort of price discovery. And I happen to lean towards the side of green candles, because the way I look at the demand and supply imbalance is just so skewed that it makes me fearful that it's just going to come all at once, and we're going to see this Omega candle just rise up nonstop for a whole day as people pile on into Bitcoin. Because you can see, like, even though we're up here, we're not really moving that quickly yet, and the demand from ETFs and from MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor, it just seems ridiculously skewed. Like there is 20x, sometimes more demand just from ETFs in a given day. And that does not seem sustainable to me. And there are some theories that OGs are selling, but I really don't think that that's necessarily the case. It could just be people moving and migrating coins to new wallets or to multi-sig or improving security. So I just think there is a supply shock coming and nobody sees it coming. And one day there just won't be enough Bitcoin, and that will just trigger this recursive demand shock coupled with this supply shock that just shoots us straight up vertically. The whole concept of cycles is interesting. I don't really believe in cycles, and before I get into it, I just want to say, like, there has been talk of a super cycle where Bitcoin just goes up and doesn't stop. I think it'll come. There will be fluctuations, there will be volatility, but it seems like the concept of cycles is not something that is in line with Bitcoin. We've had 3 cycles, I guess, that look similar. But the first cycle, like the first 4-year period of Bitcoin, the first epoch, I think you can't really count that. That's just early price discovery and formation of the Bitcoin price, right? It's very, very immature and very fragmented market. So you can say, like, there's been 3 coin tosses and they kind of look similar. But why would Bitcoin continue on mirroring 4-year periods ahead of it when adoption is exponential? I just don't see why that would be the case. So eventually the cycle, or what appears to be a cycle, should break to the upside. And I guess this is what Omega is about. It's just a breaking of the cycle. And I think an Omega candle would definitely break some of the models out there, like maybe stock to flow, and definitely, what's the other one?
Power law.
Power.
What are your thoughts about, like, those charts, the power law and stock to flow? Do you think they're useful in any way?
They're useful as a guidance, but I think saying that Bitcoin is going to follow this exact model is very dangerous, because Bitcoin just does its own thing. Like, it's not... like, people were thinking people were being recommended to trade against the power law, like when you get up here, sell everything and then you buy back cheaper. And I think that's quite dangerous, because
I agree.
You could never buy back again cheaper, right? There is no guarantee. And I think you just have to look at the writing on the wall, which is adoption seemingly is growing exponentially. Like, the US, a world superpower, is mulling over creation of strategic Bitcoin reserves and significantly adopting Bitcoin in a major way. And I believe that's going to trigger a lot of follow-on behavior from other countries too. Like, is discourse now in Russia to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and other countries too. So it's really just a matter of time. And when the US does something, everyone's just going to pile on.
Like, I want to dive into this a little bit more. Like the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, what's been proposed is basically, for anyone that doesn't know, over the next 5 years, starting from 2025, the US government will add 200,000 Bitcoin onto their balance sheet. They'll lock it up for 20 years, accumulating 1 million Bitcoin. I guess there's two questions here. Do you believe they're actually going to do it? And do you believe if you do think they're going to do it, that they're going to get to 1 million Bitcoin?
I think they will do it because they don't have a choice. With the debt, the U.S. national debt the way it is now at $36.2 trillion, I don't see them paying that off. It's just too big, and the interest rate to service that debt is just growing exponentially. And the question is, will spending stop, and can they taper it? And I just don't think they can stop spending. There's talk of a Department of Government Efficiency to kind of cut costs, but it's to be seen if that will work or not, because you're going to cut some costs there. You'll cut some jobs, government jobs probably, but that is going to make a lot of people unhappy. And what that leads to is that they vote in the other guys next term, right? So there's a delicate balance here, and this is why I'm really bearish on the world being able to survive in a fiat standard, and they absolutely need to go to a Bitcoin standard, because any attempt to fix the current problems through cost cutting or austerity or anything is going to push people to the other side, because everyone wants free stuff. So the window of opportunity to actually fix something is very narrow, kind of like we're talking about before we started the podcast. When we at Jan3 try to engage with the government, we have like a 2-year window for any given administration to do something. The first year, they are not well prepared. They're still, building out everything and preparing and getting into place. Then you have the last 2 years, and then you have the next 2 years, and then you have the last year, where either they're on their way out and they don't want to do anything, or they are preparing for re-election and they don't want to take any risk. So even within a 4-year term of any government, there is only really half of it that is viable to push something forward. And it's the same thing like when you're trying to fix the country. Like, you have a very narrow window, because you're going to have to deal with the next election soon after. So I guess to answer your question, I believe they have to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because the dollar is diminishing, and really the only net buyer of treasuries is Tether, right? Stablecoin issuing. China is tapering, and the BRICS countries are probably going to taper and step away from the dollar as well. So then, if there's no demand, what are you going to do? You have to do something, because the US is just is broke, basically. They're massively in debt, and there's no one willing to buy their debt. So yeah, I think strategic Bitcoin reserve is definitely on the cards, and even possibly more, like Bitcoin as legal tender, Bitcoin used as money.
But since Trump came out and they started talking about the strategic reserve asset, is the conversation easier for you now when you go about and try and orange pill and these nation state central banks?
Theoretically, it should be easier. But functionally, no. Like, there is still resistance to this idea. We had a call with a few people from a central bank last night, and we kind of explained what we think is going on and what will happen. And the response was kind of like, yeah, we think we're fine, and we don't think the status quo is going anywhere. And I did point out in my spiel, my pitch, that the U.S. is looking to adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, and possibly do more things with it. And yeah, they kind of it just didn't seem to register, and they kind of acknowledge it. And I even asked, do you know, like, the largest the largest financial company on the planet, BlackRock, is running this ETF, and Bitcoin is the most successful ETF they've ever launched, and they have a massive holding of Bitcoin for their clientele. And they're like, yeah, we know, but it didn't seem to really register. It's like, I know the sky is blue, but what do you want me to do? You know what I mean? Why give up the power that you have, right? Nobody that has power like that should, in theory, want to give it up, right? Unless they see the end in sight. And I believe it's difficult to do that, to see the end is in sight, because they're living in a very comfy world where they can control the money supply. I don't think they understand that there is a change that's about to happen, and it's coming very soon.
Talking about gold, Peter Schiff's having a meltdown on X lately with Michael Saylor and other proponents recommending that the US sells their gold and buys Bitcoin. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think it is a brilliant idea. I tweeted about it last night that the total holdings of Bitcoin in the US could be somewhere from 15 to 25%, between the ETFs, between the corporations, between large holdings, between the holdings of the US itself, and the Winklevoss twins, Tim Draper. There's a lot of Bitcoin in the US. So in one fell swoop, they could effectively make the US a massive superpower in terms of Bitcoin if they demonetize gold. Because they're also, the US is the largest holder of gold. So if they nuke that in favor of Bitcoin, that changes the dynamic massively. And you have to look at it from the perspective of they have political adversaries that have a lot of gold, and this could deal a massive blow against those adversaries that have been stacking gold diligently for the last couple decades, who also are stepping away from the US dollar.
It'd be interesting. I think tensions and global tensions would definitely increase if that was the case. But
the right move is not necessarily the move that's going to happen. Like, I think you and I and Saylor can see, like, this is a strategic, brilliant stroke, but there's probably a few other things like diplomacy at play here, like they have to consider. But also, to understand the move, you need to understand Bitcoin too. So we'll see what happens, but I would say it's likely to happen because it's such a brilliant tactical move.